The kill was supposed to take 3 days. Veska checked the trajectory feeds on her wrist mount and watched the red blip move through the canopy layer of the Kessara-Basin, steady and unhurried, following the river drainage southwest toward the lower marshlands. The blip had not deviated from the watercourse in 4 hours. It had not stopped. It had not doubled back or attempted a climb to higher ground. It moved at a pace that her tracking software classified as a medium terrestrial walk, consistent, rhythmic, almost mechanical in its regularity. She adjusted the magnification on the display and studied the terrain ahead of the blip. Dense broadleaf canopy, mature growth. The kind of layered forest architecture that ate sensor resolution and turned clean tracking into guesswork within 2 kilometers. She would lose line of sight on the target soon if she did not close the gap. Pace holding, she said. Southwest along the drainage, no evasion pattern. Dresk Vale, prone beside her on the observation ridge, lowered his optical scope and tilted his long, angular head. His thermal membranes flickered the Rithani expression for professional irritation. 4 hours, no evasion pattern. None. That is not prey behavior. Veska said nothing. She was thinking the same thing but was not ready to say it aloud. Prey ran, prey hid, prey panicked and made mistakes that let you close the distance. Prey did not walk steadily through hostile terrain at a pace that suggested it had somewhere to be, and was in no particular hurry about getting there. The human was not behaving like prey. She pulled up the expedition charter on her secondary display and reread the briefing summary for the 4th time since dawn. Sanctioned live observation hunt Kessara-Basin, provisional territory 7. Target species, Homo sapiens. Single adult male, approximately 40 standard years, former military, now civilian freight contractor. Recovered from a cargo vessel impounded at the territorial border for navigation violations. Offered the standard terms. Serve as observation quarry in a sanctioned hunt across a controlled wilderness preserve. Duration 72 hours. If the quarry survived the full period without capture, all charges would be dropped and transport provided to the nearest human-accessible port. Standard terms. Standard hunt. Veska had run 11 sanctioned observation hunts in her career across 6 different prey species. She had never failed to make a capture. Her record averaged 41 hours to contact, well under the 72-hour window. Dresk had run 9. Between them, they had tracked and captured 20 different sentient quarry species across 4 different biome types, and they had never encountered a target that did not exhibit prey behavior within the first 6 hours. The human had been on the ground for 16. She scrolled through her observation notes. The notes were the point of the exercise. The Rithani Territorial Authority sanctioned live hunts as a form of behavioral research, generating species-specific data on stress response, evasion capability, terrain adaptation, and cognitive function under pursuit. The hunts were non-lethal. The quarry was tagged, tracked, and eventually immobilized with a low-grade neural disruptor at a range of 30 meters or less. Medical evaluation followed within the hour. Every hunt Veska had conducted had ended with the quarry in good health, if somewhat shaken. The data went to the Territorial Behavioral Archive. The quarry went home. She had explained all of this to the human during intake processing. His name was Nalan Koren. He had listened with the attentive stillness of someone accustomed to receiving operational briefs, back straight, eyes steady, hands resting on his knees. He asked 3 questions: the boundaries of the preserve, the rules governing what tools or materials he could use from the environment, and whether the neural disruptor would leave lasting effects. Mild headache, she had told him, dissipates within 2 hours. Understood, he had said. Then he had looked at her directly, which most quarry species found difficult during intake, when the power dynamic was at its starkest, and said, "How many of these have you run?" 11, all successful. He had nodded. not the nod of defeat or resignation that she usually saw at that point in the conversation. The nod of a man filing information. "One more question," he had said. "The neural disruptor 30-meter range, you said. Is that a hard limit, or does accuracy degrade past 30? She had told him accuracy degraded past 30 but was still functional to about 45. He had nodded again, with the same filing away quality. She had not thought about it at the time. She was thinking about it now. He had asked about her weapon's effective range, not as a frightened quarry measuring how close the predator could get, as a professional evaluating an opponent's tools. Dresk rolled onto his side and brought up the expedition's atmospheric sensor array. Wind shifted. He may be using the drainage to mask his thermal profile. That would be evasion behavior. Following a water source is basic survival. It does not require evasion training. He is not stopping to drink. He is not stopping to forage. He has been walking for 4 hours at a pace that suggests he knows exactly where he is going. Veska pulled the full topographic display onto her wrist mount and traced the human's trajectory forward. The river drainage ran southwest for another 11 kilometers before splitting into a delta network across the lower marshlands. The marshlands were dense, wet, and devastation on sensor resolution. If the human reached them, tracking would become exponentially harder. "He is heading for the marshlands," she said. Deliberately. Dresk's thermal membranes went flat. How would he know the marshlands degrade our sensors? "I did not tell him." "Then how?" She thought about the intake. The human had studied the terrain map she provided standard practice. All quarry received a basic orientation map of the preserve for approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Then he had handed it back and said he was ready. 90 seconds to memorize terrain he had never seen. To identify that the marshlands would be the most difficult environment for his pursuers to operate in. To select a route that would take him there along natural cover without a single wrong turn. "He worked it out," she said, "from the map." Dresk looked at her. She could read his expression without the thermal membranes. This was not supposed to happen. They broke camp within the hour and began their descent into the basin, moving on a parallel track that would bring them ahead of the human's projected path. Standard pursuit protocol. Get ahead, set an observation post, wait for the quarry to walk into the engagement zone. Veska had used this method successfully on every hunt. It relied on one principle, that the quarry would continue moving in the same direction, at the same pace, following the same logic that survival instinct provided. By midday, she was no longer certain that principle applied. The human's blip had stopped, not gradually, not a slowdown to rest. A full stop, holding position for 22 minutes at a point where the river drainage curved around a basalt outcropping. Veska and Dresk were 3 kilometers ahead on a forested ridge, watching the blip through the tracking display. "Rest stop," Dresk said. "He has not rested in 4 hours. Why stop now at this specific point?" "Fatigue, hunger, biological necessity." "The curve." He stopped at the curve. Veska expanded the topographic overlay. The basalt outcropping created a natural elevated position overlooking the drainage from the east. If the human had climbed it and the tracking data showed a slight altitude gain during the stop, he would have a clear sightline up the drainage for approximately 400 meters. He would be able to see anything following his trail. He was not resting, he was checking his back trail. "He is looking for us," she said. Dresk's membranes went rigid. In 12 years of hunting partnership, she had never seen him display that particular configuration. It took her a moment to identify it. Uncertainty. The human resumed movement 17 minutes later. Same pace, same direction, southwest toward the marshlands. But something had changed, not in his behavior but in hers. She was tracking him, and some part of her pattern recognition architecture was sending a low, persistent signal that she could not resolve into language. Something was wrong. Something about the geometry of this pursuit did not fit the model she had used successfully for 11 prior hunts. She checked the signal data. The human's tracking tag was functioning normally, a subcutaneous transponder placed during intake, broadcasting a continuous positional fix on a frequency the quarry could not detect or disable. The tag was standard equipment. Every quarry carried one. It was the foundation of the entire observation methodology. The human's tag was broadcasting his position to within 2 meters. And the human knew that. He had been told during intake. It was part of the full disclosure protocol. Quarry had the right to know how they were being tracked. He knew she could see him. He knew she could track his every move. And he was walking steadily toward the marshlands at the pace of a man who had calculated exactly how long it would take to get there, and was executing that calculation with the precision of a filed flight plan. He was not running, he was not hiding, he was not panicking. He was navigating. The first night was when the geometry changed. Veska and Dresk established their observation post on a ridge overlooking the eastern approach to the marshlands. The human was still 2 kilometers south, and the tracking data showed he had stopped for the night in a shallow depression beside the river, sheltered from wind on 3 sides by the natural terrain. A sensible campsite. Good cover, access to water, defensible geometry. He had selected it with the efficiency of someone who understood fieldcraft at an institutional level, the kind of site selection that took most species 3 or 4 failed attempts to learn, if they learned it at all. Dresk took first watch. Veska reviewed the day's data in her shelter and tried to build a behavioral profile. Every previous quarry species had exhibited some form of predictable stress response within the first 12 hours. The Torvathi, an arboreal species with advanced spatial reasoning, typically climbed to maximum elevation and froze, hoping to outlast the hunt from a position of perceived safety. They were usually captured in their trees within 30 hours, dehydrated and trembling. The crescent-fast, low-gravity quadrupeds ran hard and fast in the opening hours, covering enormous ground, then collapsed from exhaustion and were captured during recovery. The Malthei semi-aquatic, highly intelligent, communal attempted coordinated misdirection using environmental manipulation, building false trails and scent decoys. Clever, but they broke under the sustained pressure of knowing they were tracked by something they could not see. The Velesi, a nocturnal species with exceptional hearing, hid in acoustic dead zones and went motionless for hours, relying on stillness to outlast the pursuit clock. Even they showed cortisol spikes within the first 6 hours that degraded their decision-making by day 2. All of them ran, all of them hid. All of them displayed measurable physiological stress, elevated cardiac output, hormonal flood, compromised decision-making within the first operational period. The human's physiological telemetry, relayed through the tracking tag's secondary medical channel, showed a resting heart rate of 62 beats per minute. His cortisol levels were within baseline parameters for his species. His sleep architecture, when he finally settled for the night, displayed normal cycling through deep and REM phases. He was sleeping soundly. On the first night of a live pursuit, in hostile alien wilderness, with 2 professional hunters 3 kilometers away who had been tracking his every step for 16 hours. His body was not afraid. She checked the comparative database. The Behavioral Research Archive contained telemetry data from 347 prior sanctioned hunts across 6 prey species. She ran the human's first-day profile against the aggregate. No match, not even a partial correlation. Every prior quarry species showed stress onset within the first 6 hours, most within the first 2. The human was 16 hours into the pursuit, and his physiological state was indistinguishable from a man on a routine hiking trip through familiar terrain. She documented the finding and added a note. Subject does not display prey-typical stress indicators. Physiological baseline suggests the subject does not perceive the current situation as a predatory threat. This contradicts the foundational assumption of the observation protocol, which presumes that quarry species will exhibit measurable flight or fight response to pursuit conditions. She paused, read it back, then added, alternative hypothesis. The subject species may not possess a standard flight response to predatory pursuit because it has not evolved under predation pressure sufficient to install one. The subject appears to register the pursuit as a tactical problem to be solved rather than a survival crisis to be endured. This would place Homo sapiens in a behavioral category for which the current observation methodology has no framework and no precedent. She closed the log and tried to sleep. She could not. Something about the data was pulling at the edges of her professional calm, the shape of a pattern she could almost see but not yet name. At 03:40 station time, Dresk woke her. The blip moved. She was on her scope within 30 seconds. The human's tracking tag showed movement, not the slow drift of a man getting up to relieve himself, but steady, purposeful displacement. Northeast, away from the marshlands, back up the drainage. Toward them. He reversed course, Dresk said. His voice was flat, controlled, but his thermal membranes were cycling in a pattern she had never seen, rapid alternation between alert and alarm, the involuntary display of a predator whose threat calculus was recalculating in real time. How fast? Same pace, steady. No deviation. She studied the display. The human was moving back up the drainage at the same measured walk he had maintained all day. Same rhythm, same mechanical consistency, except now he was not heading for the marshlands. He was heading toward the ridge where 2 Rithani hunters were camped in the dark. He cannot know our position, she said. The tracking system is one-directional. He has no equipment. He has no night optics. Then why is he walking toward us in the dark? She had no answer. She watched the blip move through the darkness, following the watercourse with the precision of a man who had memorized the terrain from a 90-second look at a map 16 hours ago, and she felt the first genuine chill of something she had not experienced in 11 previous hunts and did not have a professional vocabulary for. The blip stopped, 1.6 kilometers south. The human had settled into a new position, another defensible depression, another sheltered campsite, this one within observation range of the ridge. He had moved closer to them, in the dark, without any tracking technology, without night vision, without a map. He had shortened the distance between quarry and hunter by 400 meters, positioned himself in a site with clear sightlines toward the ridge, and then he had gone back to sleep. His telemetry settled within 4 minutes of stopping. Resting heart rate, 61. Cortisol, baseline. Sleep onset, 7 minutes. Veska sat with the data for a long time. The forest noise filled the observation post, the low drone of nocturnal insects, the distant calls of the basin's native avian species, the river murmuring below. Normal sounds. The sounds of a wilderness that did not know anything was different. She opened her observation log and wrote one sentence. I believe the subject is counter-tracking us. Dawn broke at 06:12, and the human was already moving. Veska tracked him through the scope from the ridgeline as the morning light filtered through the canopy below. He was walking along the eastern bank of the drainage, moving north at the same steady pace, carrying nothing but the basic survival kit he had been issued at intake: a water container, a thermal blanket, a signaling device for emergency extraction. He had rolled the blanket into a compact cylinder and strapped it across his back. The water container was clipped to his belt. His hands were free. She noted his posture. On every prior hunt at this stage of the pursuit, day 2, morning, the quarry now aware that it had not escaped during the night, prey species displayed visible deterioration. Shoulders dropped, gait shortened. Head movements became rapid and erratic. scanning the environment for threats with the frantic quality of organisms that knew they were being followed and did not know how to make it stop. The human walked with his shoulders square and his head steady. His gait was the same length it had been at the start. His head movements were slow, deliberate, sweeping not the frantic scanning of prey, but the methodical observation of a professional studying terrain. He paused periodically, not to rest, but to examine something: a tree with exposed root structure, a rock formation that created a natural observation point, the angle of a secondary ridge that ran perpendicular to the drainage. Each stop lasted between 40 and 90 seconds. Then he continued. He was reading the ground. "He is patterning the terrain," Veska said. Dresk was beside her on the ridge, scope to his eye, tracking the human's movement through the tree line. "Define patterning." "He is not moving through the terrain, he is mapping it. Every time he stops, he studies a feature: elevated ground, natural choke points, sightlines, cover density, the way water has cut erosion channels that would funnel movement. He is building a mental model of the operational space, not for escape, for control. That is not quarry behavior. No, it is hunter behavior." The sentence sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. Dresk's membranes went flat and stayed flat. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Below, the human continued his methodical northward walk, stopping, studying, moving, stopping again. The rhythm of a predator learning its territory. "I want to test something," Veska said. "Break protocol. I want to move our position and see if he adjusts." Standard observation protocol called for maintaining position and allowing the quarry to move through the engagement zone. Breaking protocol meant repositioning mid-hunt, creating new variables, potentially alerting the quarry to the hunter's location through noise or movement. Dresk looked at her. If he is counter-tracking, repositioning will confirm his hypothesis. If he is counter-tracking, he has already located us. I need to know if that is what is happening. I need the data point. They packed the observation post and moved, northeast along the ridge, descending into a secondary drainage that ran perpendicular to the human's route. 2 kilometers of careful movement through dense undergrowth, minimizing noise, staying below the ridgeline, using the terrain to mask their thermal signatures. Professional-grade fieldcraft honed across 12 years and 20 successful hunts, every step placed on solid ground. Every transition between cover timed against wind direction and ambient noise. The kind of movement that had eluded detection by every quarry species they had ever pursued. They established the new post at 0840. The human's blip was still moving north along the primary drainage, now approximately 1.8 kilometers south-southeast of their new position. Veska trained her scope on the drainage and waited. At 0914, the human stopped. He stood motionless in the riverbed for 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Then he turned his head not down drainage, where he had been walking, but northeast, toward the secondary drainage, toward the ridge where Veska and Dresk were now positioned. He looked directly at their ridgeline. Through the scope at 600 meters of magnification, she could see his face, weathered, calm. The creased skin around his eyes and the stubble on his jaw caught the morning light. He was squinting slightly against the angle of the sun, and the expression on his face was not fear or confusion or desperation. It was assessment. He was evaluating whether they had moved. He was confirming a hypothesis he had formed during the night. After 11 seconds, he turned back to his original heading and resumed walking. Same pace, same rhythm, same absolute mechanical steadiness. Veska set the scope down. Her hands were not shaking. They wanted to. "He made us," Dresk said. His voice had changed. The professional evenness was gone, replaced by something older and rawer, the tone of a hunter confronting information that rearranged the entire operational picture in a way that could not be walked back. "He does not have tracking equipment. He does not have our frequency. He should not be able to detect us at this range, in this cover, with no technological assistance of any kind. He is not detecting us, Veska said. He is deducing us. He moved toward us last night to test whether we were on that ridge. When he moved and we did not reposition, that confirmed our location. When we broke position this morning, he stopped to check whether the geometry had changed. It had. Now he knows we have moved northeast. He does not need sensors. He is using us as his sensors, testing our behavior, reading our reactions, building a predictive model of how we operate and how we think. How is that possible without equipment? She thought about the 90-second map study, the steady pace, the overnight approach, the deliberate stop at the basalt outcropping to check his back trail, the morning terrain reading pauses, the precise, methodical way he processed each new feature as if cataloging it in a system that had been running since before he was conscious of its existence. His species evolved as persistence predator, she said. I read the briefing data during intake preparation. Humans are endurance pursuit hunters. Their ancestral hunting method was to select prey, follow it, and simply keep walking until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Not faster, not stronger, just relentless. They tracked by reading signs in the terrain: ground disturbance, broken vegetation, displaced soil, thermal residue, moisture patterns on stone. No technology, no augmentation. Just observation and patience, and the physiological capacity to keep moving long after every other species in their biosphere had given up and stopped. Dresk said nothing for a long time. We are not hunting a prey species, Veska said. We are hunting a predator, an apex predator from a world where the dominant hunting strategy is pursuit, and we have given him 72 hours in a terrain he has already mapped, with full knowledge of our tracking methodology, our weapon range, and our operational patterns. What is he pursuing? Information. He is building a complete operational picture: our position, our movement patterns, our decision-making logic, our responses under pressure. He reversed course last night to see if we would react. We did not reposition, which told him we were static. He advanced this morning to see if we had changed position overnight. We had. Each test gives him a data point, and each data point narrows his model of how we think and how we move. To what end? If he survives 72 hours, he goes free. He does not need to know where we are. He only needs to avoid us. Veska was quiet for a long time. Below, the human's blip continued its steady northward movement along the drainage. I do not think he is trying to avoid us, she said. I think he is trying to understand us, the way a hunter studies quarry before committing to the final approach. The afternoon of the second day broke every model Veska had ever built. The human changed direction 3 times between noon and dusk. Each change was preceded by a stop of between 2 and 4 minutes, the terrain reading pauses she had identified that morning. Each change took him along a route that used natural terrain features to obscure his movement from the last known hunter position. He was not running, he was maneuvering, and he was getting closer. By 14:00, the distance between the human and the observation post had shrunk to 1.1 kilometers. By 16:00, it was 900 meters, close enough that Veska could track him through the scope in real time without referencing the electronic display. She watched him move through a stand of mature broadleaf trees with the fluid economy of a man who had spent decades in environments where noise discipline meant the difference between a successful stalk and an empty hunt. His footfalls were precise. He placed each step on solid ground, avoiding deadfall, avoiding loose substrate, selecting his path through the undergrowth with a physical intelligence that looked less like training and more like instinct refined over deep time into an art form. He moved like a hunter, not metaphorically, not in the cautious, instinct-driven way that a frightened animal might move through cover. He moved with the trained, deliberate economy of a professional who had stalked living targets and knew exactly how much noise, how much visibility, and how much time each terrain feature would cost or conceal. Dresk had not spoken in 2 hours. He was tracking the human through his scope with the focused stillness of a Rithani who had stopped processing the data as a professional exercise, and was now processing it as a personal reckoning, with a category of experience his career had never prepared him for. At 16:22, the human stopped behind a fallen trunk approximately 800 meters from the observation post, and did something that made Veska's chest constrict with a sensation she had no professional vocabulary for. He sat down, leaned his back against the trunk, drank from his water container and looked up at the canopy. Then he closed his eyes. His telemetry showed his heart rate settled to 60 beats per minute. His breathing slowed to 12 cycles. His muscle tension dropped to resting baseline. He was sleeping, 800 meters from 2 professional hunters armed with a neural disruptor effective at 45 meters, sleeping with his back against a log in contested terrain on the second day of an active pursuit. Because he was not afraid of them. He had been tracking them for over 24 hours, building an operational picture of their behavior, testing their responses, mapping their positions with nothing but deduction and displaced shale. He knew where they were. He knew they could not engage him at 800 meters. He knew, with the calm certainty of a predator who has studied its environment and calculated every variable, that he was safe at this distance. He was resting because he could afford to rest. The way a hunter rests between stalks, conserving energy for the next phase. The way something at the top of its food chain sleeps deeply, because nothing in its 300,000 years of evolutionary history has ever given it reason to sleep any other way. Veska, Dresk's voice was very quiet. His trajectory over the last 4 hours, plotted against our position. She plotted it. The 3-direction changes, mapped against the terrain, formed a pattern she recognized immediately, because she had used it herself on 6 different hunts across 4 different biome types. A flanking approach, textbook, 3-stage lateral displacement to gain a position perpendicular to the target's line of sight, using terrain features to mask each transition. It was a hunting technique, a predator technique, the exact method she had trained in, practiced for 12 years, and deployed against quarry species who never recognized it because they had no frame of reference for what a flanking approach looked like from the inside. The human had executed it against her, cleanly, patiently, without a single wasted movement. "He is working an approach on us," she said. The words came out flat, stripped of inflection, because any emotional coloring would have betrayed the thing she was feeling. And the thing she was feeling was not compatible with being the hunter in this equation. "Neural disruptor effective range is 45 meters, Dresk said. He is at 800, even at his current approach rate. He is not going to approach to 45 meters. Not yet, he does not need to, he is demonstrating capability." She watched the sleeping human through her scope, eyes closed, breathing even, heart rate 60. A man taking a nap on a warm afternoon. He is showing us that he can approach without detection, using our own methods, in terrain he memorized from a 90-second map study. He is not approaching to engage. He is approaching to prove that he could if he chose to. At 17:10, the human did something new. He stood and walked 40 meters east to a narrow game trail that intersected the drainage. A trail Veska had noted on the topographic overlay, but dismissed as irrelevant because no quarry species had ever used the local fauna paths. He crouched beside the trail for 6 minutes, his telemetry showing no elevation in stress markers, just the focused calm of someone performing a familiar task. Through the scope, she watched him gather 3 lengths of flexible vine from the undergrowth, twist them together with quick, practiced motions, and construct a simple tension loop anchored between 2 saplings flanking the trail. A snare, the human had built a snare. Not for food, the ration kit provided adequate nutrition for the full 72 hours, and the game trail's tracks belonged to small arboreal mammals that would provide negligible caloric value. He had built it because building snares was what his hands did when his body was in terrain that contained prey. The behavior was so automatic, so deeply embedded in his operational vocabulary, that he had performed it without apparent conscious decision. The way a Rithani's membranes cycled through display patterns during social interaction, the way her own hands reached for her scope when movement crossed her peripheral vision. But the snare's placement told her something else. It was positioned on a trail that ran perpendicular to the human's approach vector, a trail that led from the lower elevation toward the secondary ridge. If Veska or Dresk had descended from the observation post to close the distance, the game trail would have been a natural route through the dense undergrowth. The snare was not designed to catch small mammals. It was designed to tell the human whether anyone had come down the ridge while he slept. An early warning system, built from vines in 6 minutes. He set a perimeter, Dresk said. His membranes had gone completely still again, that unnatural stillness she was beginning to associate with a predator, whose operating assumptions had been exceeded so thoroughly that the involuntary display systems simply shut down, unable to process a signal they had never been designed to broadcast. Not just a perimeter, Veska said. A detection tripwire on the most likely approach route from our position to his. He knows the game trail connects the lower drainage to the secondary ridge. He knows it is the path of least resistance through the undergrowth. If we had attempted a night approach, we would have used that trail because it is the obvious descent route, and the snare would have told him we were coming before we covered 30 meters. She documented the observation. Her log entry was becoming longer and more detailed with each hour, the language increasingly precise, increasingly stripped of the professional detachment that she had maintained through 11 prior hunts without effort. The detachment was failing because the framework that supported it, the foundational assumption that she was the predator, and the target was prey, had been quietly dismantled by a man who built tripwires from vines and took naps at 800 meters. She opened her observation log and began a new field entry. Field log Kessara-Seven, Day 2, Hour 32. I am formally revising the behavioral classification of this hunt. The subject, adult male Homo sapiens, designated Quarry 14, does not exhibit prey behavior. He does not flee, hide, freeze, or display measurable stress response to active pursuit. His physiological telemetry shows baseline normal cardiac, hormonal, and respiratory function throughout the observation period, consistent with a subject who does not perceive the pursuit as a threat to his survival. Instead, the subject exhibits predator-type behavior. He has demonstrated terrain mapping from a single 90-second map exposure, counter-tracking without equipment, deliberate approach using textbook flanking technique, backtrail observation from natural elevated positions, and threat range awareness calibrated to our specific weapon system. These are not instinctive responses. They are trained competencies deployed with professional-grade discipline in a species whose evolutionary history suggests such competencies may be partially innate. The subject is not evading capture. He is studying his pursuers with the methodical patience of a predator building an operational picture before deciding whether and when to engage. Revised classification. The current observation protocol designed for prey species behavioral research is not applicable to Homo sapiens. The subject is not quarry. The subject is a competing predator operating inside the same territorial space, and the behavioral dynamics of this hunt have inverted. We are not observing a flight response. We are being observed by a pursuit response, and we have been since hour 1. She closed the log. Below, the human opened his eyes at precisely the moment the late afternoon light shifted through the canopy. As if he had set an internal alarm calibrated to the sun angle, stood up with unhurried ease, brushed the forest debris from his clothes, and resumed walking. Same pace, same rhythm, same absolute unhurried steadiness, toward them. He walked until dusk, closing the distance to 600 meters before stopping for his second night. He selected another defensible campsite, this one nestled against a rock face with a single approach vector, the kind of position that a seasoned field operator would choose, because it reduced the number of directions a threat could arrive from to one, and guaranteed he would hear any approach before it reached him. His telemetry settled into sleep architecture within 20 minutes, resting heart rate, 59, cortisol, baseline, the body of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be and knew it. Veska did not sleep. She sat in the observation post with Dresk, and they reviewed the data in silence, and at some point during the night, the pattern she had been unable to name finally resolved. She was not afraid of him. That was not what she felt. What she felt was the cold, precise recognition that arrives when a professional encounters another professional who operates at the same level but from the opposite side of the equation. She had spent 12 years as a predator studying prey, learning their patterns, predicting their behavior, closing distances they did not know were being closed. She was good at it. Dresk was good at it. Their record was 20 captures in 20 hunts, and they had earned that record through discipline and craft. And in 32 hours, Nalin Koren, a civilian freight contractor with a military background and a 90-second memory of a terrain map, had replicated every technique in her professional repertoire and turned it against her with an efficiency that her own training could not fault. Not because he was better than her, because his species had been doing this for 300,000 years, because the thing she had trained for, the thing she had studied and practiced and refined across a 12-year career until it felt like mastery, was something humans did as naturally as they breathed. The way they walked. The way they read terrain. The way they filed information about threat sources and built behavioral models of the things that shared their space. It was not a skill for them. It was architecture built into the species so deeply that a man with no equipment, no map, no technology of any kind could do it in his sleep. And had. She pulled up the intake briefing data one more time. The human service record was sparse 12 years in a military logistics unit, then discharge and transition to civilian freight contracting. No special operations background. No sniper qualification. No advanced reconnaissance training. A logistics specialist who drove supply trucks and loaded cargo manifests. The most ordinary military career imaginable. And yet, in 40 hours of field observation, he had demonstrated counter-tracking capability, terrain reading precision, flanking approach technique, perimeter security construction, and behavioral modeling of his pursuers that matched or exceeded the operational standard of a professionally trained Rithani hunting pair. He had done it with no equipment, no map, no sensors, and a 90-second orientation briefing. He had done it while maintaining a resting heart rate that never exceeded 64 beats per minute. The briefing data contained one additional detail that Veska had overlooked during intake preparation, because it had seemed irrelevant to a prey species behavioral study. Under the heading Recreational Activities, the human's personal file listed 3 items: distance running, orienteering, and fishing. Distance running, the persistence predator's defining physical capability. Orienteering, terrain navigation using observation and spatial memory. Fishing, the patient, methodical observation of a target's behavior until the moment of engagement. His hobbies were his species' predatory toolkit, practiced recreationally, maintained for pleasure. The way a Rithani might sharpen her claws on a scratching post, not because she needed to hunt, but because the architecture demanded maintenance whether the hunt was happening or not. Veska closed the file and stared at the darkness beyond the observation post. Somewhere below, 600 meters down the ridge, a man was sleeping with the telemetry of absolute biological peace, in a campsite he had selected for its defensive geometry, behind a perimeter he had built from vines, with a complete operational model of his hunter's capabilities stored in a brain that had been built, across 300 millennia of evolutionary pressure, to do exactly this: to track, to pattern, to pursue, to wait, and to outlast anything that shared its territory. The third morning brought the end, and Veska saw it coming the way she had seen the end of every hunt in the geometry. She had not slept. Dresk had taken a 4-hour rotation, and during his rest period she had watched the human's blip hold position at 600 meters. He slept through the night with the telemetry of a man in his own bed, and he rose at first light and began his morning routine: water, stretching, a slow walk around his campsite perimeter that his telemetry showed was performed at a heart rate of 64. He was warming up, the way a hunter warms up before the working day begins. Then he started walking again, north, toward them, closing the gap with the same measured stride, the same unhurried rhythm, the same absolute patience that had not broken once in 40 hours. 500 meters, 450, 400, 350. At 07:30, at 300 meters, the human stopped walking. He stood in a small clearing beside the drainage, visible through the canopy gaps, and he did something that no quarry species in 347 recorded hunts across the Kessara program's entire operational history had ever done. He looked up at the ridge, directly at their observation post, directly at the exact point where Veska and Dresk were lying prone behind their scopes, and he raised his hand, not a distress signal, not a surrender gesture, an open-palmed wave, the casual, unforced acknowledgement of one professional recognizing another across a contested space. The gesture said with absolute clarity, "I know where you are. I have known for some time. We both know what has been happening here, and I wanted you to know that I know." Dresk made a sound she had never heard from him in 12 years. A low, involuntary exhalation through his dorsal vents, the Rithani equivalent of a man whose breath has been taken from him by something he cannot contest. "He is at 300 meters, Veska said. Her voice was very steady. "Inside our engagement envelope, we can descend and make contact within the hour." "Can we?" "Technically." Dresk was silent. They both understood what technically meant. It meant that the neural disruptor had a range of 45 meters, and that closing from 300 to 45 required traversing 255 meters of terrain that the human had spent 2.5 days studying, mapping, and positioning himself within. It meant that the human knew their weapon, knew its range, knew its limitations, and had placed himself at a distance that was close enough to invite approach, but far enough to guarantee he would see them coming and have time to react long before they reached engagement range. It meant that any descent from the ridge would cross terrain the human had already patterned, through sightlines he had already mapped, toward a target who was not fleeing but waiting. And waiting was not what prey did. Waiting, calm, patient, positioned, watching, was what the other kind of thing did. The kind of thing that let you walk into a space it had prepared and then showed you, at the range of its choosing, that the geometry had never been in your favor. "I am making a command decision," Veska said. "I am filing for early termination of the hunt." Dresk looked at her. His membranes were cycling slowly now, not alarm, not uncertainty, but something closer to resolution. The expression of a predator that had assessed the situation fully and arrived at a conclusion it did not enjoy but could not argue with. "On what grounds?" "Behavioral protocol failure. The observation methodology presumes a prey-type quarry. The subject is not prey-type. The protocol cannot generate valid data under these conditions, and continuing the hunt introduces risk variables that the methodology was never designed to model or address." "You are recommending we stop hunting a quarry that is 300 meters away and standing still." "I am recommending we stop hunting a quarry that has spent 2.5 days hunting us and is now standing 300 meters away to make sure we know it." Dresk considered this for a long time, Below, the human sat down in the clearing, cross-legged, and began eating from his ration kit. His telemetry showed a heart rate of 58 beats per minute, resting, patient, unhurried, the body language of a man who had all the time in the world and had known it since the moment the hunt began. Agreed, Dresk said. Veska filed the termination request at 08:15. The territorial authority acknowledged it at 08:47. By 09:30, the extraction transport was inbound, and the hunt was over 38 hours ahead of schedule, with the quarry uncaptured, uninjured, and sitting in a clearing eating breakfast while his two hunters packed their equipment on a ridge above him. During the extraction debrief, the transport coordinator, a senior officer named Keshal who had processed the outcomes of every Kessara hunt for 7 years, asked the standard post-hunt questions: quarry health status, behavioral observations, capture method and timing. Quarry uncaptured, Veska said. Hunt terminated by command decision, behavioral protocol failure. Keshal looked up from her datapad. This is the first uncaptured quarry in the Kessara program's 11-year operational history. 347 hunts, 347 captures. You are filing number 348 as a failure. I am filing it as a reclassification. Elaborate. Veska thought about how to say it. She had been thinking about how to say it since the human waved at them from 300 meters with the easy confidence of a man who had never once, in 42 hours of active pursuit, felt like prey. The sanctioned hunt program is designed to study prey behavior, she said. Stress response, evasion capability, cognitive function under pursuit. The program assumes that the quarry species will exhibit prey-type behavioral dynamics when subjected to predatory pursuit conditions. Every prior quarry species has confirmed this assumption within the first 12 hours. And the human did not. The human exhibited predator-type behavior from the first hour and never deviated from it. He countertracked us without equipment. He mapped our positions through deduction and behavioral testing. He executed a flanking approach using textbook technique indistinguishable from our own operational methodology. He closed the distance between us on his own initiative, at a pace, and along routes that demonstrated complete terrain mastery from a single 90-second map exposure. He did not display measurable physiological stress at any point during 42 hours of continuous observation. His resting heart rate on the second night of active pursuit, at a distance of 600 meters from 2 armed hunters, was 59 beats per minute. Keshal had stopped writing. Her datapad rested on her knee, the stylus motionless in her hand. Her membranes were absolutely still. He was not our quarry, Veska said. He never was. His species does not possess a prey response to pursuit because it has never, in 300,000 years of continuous evolutionary development, needed one. When a human is pursued, it does not run. It turns around. It studies what is following it. It learns the pursuer's patterns, maps the pursuer's behavior, tests the pursuer's responses with deliberate probes and calculated advances, and begins closing the distance on its own terms. We did not observe a flight response. We were subjected to a counter-pursuit, and we did not recognize it until the subject chose to show us. Keshal was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had the careful, measured quality of someone selecting each word against the weight of its implications. How many human quarry have been processed through the sanctioned hunt program? He was the first. The intake team classified Homo sapiens as a generalist species, moderate physical capability, no documented predatory specialization, estimated capture window of 20 to 30 hours based on aggregate behavioral modeling. And you are telling me the aggregate behavioral model is inapplicable. I am telling you it is inverted. The model predicts prey behavior. The subject exhibited predator behavior. Every assumption the model makes about how a quarry will respond to pursuit stress onset, flight response, degradation of cognitive function, progressive exhaustion of evasion options, failed within the first hour because the subject was not evading. He was operating. And the model has no category for a quarry that operates against the pursuit, rather than fleeing from it. Keshal made a notation on her datapad. Then she made another. Then she set the datapad down entirely and looked at Veska with an expression that Veska recognized, because she had seen it in her own reflection that morning while packing the observation post. The expression of a professional confronting the possibility that an entire operational framework might require demolition. "This goes to the authority board," Keshal said, "today, before anyone processes another human intake." "I would appreciate that," Veska said. The human was waiting by the extraction point when the transport settled onto the clearing floor. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, the thermal blanket still strapped neatly across his back, the water container clipped to his belt. He watched the transport land with the calm attention of a man evaluating a piece of machinery, noting the approach vector, the engine noise, the way the landing struts absorbed the ground contact. Veska walked to him. It was the first time she had been within speaking distance since the intake briefing 42 hours ago, and she found that the experience was different now. During intake, he had been a data point, a quarry species, a set of parameters, a behavioral profile waiting to be filled. Now he was something else entirely, and the shift in her perception was so thorough that she had to actively regulate her membrane displays to maintain professional composure in his presence. "Mr. Corin, the hunt has been terminated ahead of schedule. All charges against you are dropped per the terms of the agreement. Transport will take you to the nearest human-accessible port." "I heard." He looked at her. Same direct gaze, same steady assessment. "Your partner is good. The reposition on the morning of day 2 was clean work. I almost lost your new position when you dropped below the secondary ridge. Good use of the terrain, good noise discipline." He was critiquing their fieldcraft, with the constructive, collegial tone of a professional offering a debrief to a peer he respected. "You located our position after the reposition," she said. "How?" "Displaced sediment on the north face of the secondary drainage. About 2 kilograms of loose shale moved downslope in a pattern that did not match the natural erosion gradient. Probably a foot placement during your descent left foot, based on the distribution angle. The shale on that face is volcanic, lighter than the basalt substrate, so it sits on top of the layer below it and shows displacement easily." He shrugged. "Old habit. You spend enough years tracking in rough country, you learn to read what the ground is telling you. Disturbed earth is the loudest signal in any forest, louder than footsteps, louder than breathing. It stays for hours after the person who made it is gone. You learn to read what the ground is telling you. 300,000 years of persistence predation, distilled into a sentence spoken with the casual ease of a man describing how he takes his morning coffee. "May I ask you something, Mr. Corin?" "Go ahead." "During the intake, you asked about the effective range of the neural disruptor. You asked about the preserved boundaries and the rules governing environmental tool use. You did not ask how to avoid capture. You did not ask about escape routes or safe zones or extraction procedures. Why?" He looked at her for a moment. The weathered face, the calm eyes, the expression of a man who understood exactly what she was asking and was deciding how much of the answer she was ready for. "Because avoiding capture was not the problem," he said. "The problem was understanding how you hunt. Once I understood that, the rest was just walking." Just walking, the defining capability of the most successful persistence predator in documented biological history. The ability to keep walking when everything else has stopped. To read terrain, track movement, pattern behavior and close distance with the patient, methodical, relentless efficiency of a species that spent 300 millennia chasing every other organism on its planet to the ground using nothing but its legs, its lungs, and its capacity to observe, remember, and adapt. Just walking. Veska filed her final report that evening from her quarters at the territorial station. The report was longer than any she had written for a sanctioned hunt, 43 pages of observational data, behavioral analysis, physiological telemetry, and a formal recommendation that the territorial authority suspend all sanctioned live observation hunts involving Homo sapiens targets, effective immediately and without exception. She concluded the report with her amended field log entry. The final paragraph read, Homo sapiens is classified in the Territorial Behavioral Database as a generalist species of moderate physical capability and no documented predatory specialization. This classification is incorrect. Homo sapiens is an apex persistence predator, a species whose primary evolutionary adaptation is the ability to pursue any target species over unlimited distance and duration using terrain observation, behavioral modeling, endurance locomotion, and the cognitive capacity to predict the behavior of any organism it chooses to study after minimal exposure. The implications for the sanctioned hunt program are unambiguous. A live observation hunt requires a prey-type quarry that will exhibit flight behavior under pursuit conditions. Homo sapiens is not prey-type. A human placed in a pursuit scenario will not flee, hide, or display stress. It will begin studying the pursuer. It will map the terrain, pattern the hunter's behavior, test the hunter's responses with deliberate probes and calculated approaches, and systematically dismantle the hunter's tactical advantages using techniques refined across 300,000 years of unbroken predatory evolution. The subject did not survive the hunt. He conducted one. The fact that we were unaware of this inversion until the subject chose to reveal it should be understood as a measure of the capability gap, not a failure of our training or our craft. Recommendation: reclassify Homo sapiens from generalist quarry candidate to apex predator, and remove the species from the sanctioned hunt program permanently. Future interactions with Homo sapiens should proceed from the foundational understanding that this species does not respond to predatory pressure the way every other documented species does, because it occupies a position in its native food chain that no other spacefaring species has ever held. When humans are pursued, they do not run. They turn around, they study what is following them, and then they begin to walk. And they do not stop. She signed the report, filed it, closed the terminal. On the transport manifest, Corin's extraction status was listed as quarry released, uncaptured. Veska stared at the designation for a long time, then opened an annotation field beneath it and added 4 words. He was never quarry.